I don't care what you're doing. You need to stop and listen to this interview. In fact, I don't care what you're doing for the rest of your life. If you can, you just need to listen to this. Now, Australian biologist Jeremy Griffith. He's the author of a book which is titled Freedom, The End of the Human Condition. And this is the book here.
For having me on your program, Craig. Finding understanding of our psychologically troubled human condition has actually been what the efforts of every human who has ever lived has been dedicated to achieving and has been contributing to finding. As Professor Prosen said, finding understanding of the human condition has been the holy grail of the whole human journey of conscious thought and inquiry. We humans have absolutely lived in hope, faith and trust that one day, somewhere, someplace, all the efforts of everyone, but in particular scientists, would finally produce the completely redeeming, uplifting and healing understanding of us humans. Now, I know it must seem outrageous to claim that this goal of goals has finally been achieved, but it has. In fact, the human condition is such a difficult subject for us humans to confront and deal with that I couldn't be talking about it so openly and freely if it hadn't been solved. I think everyone will agree that what we need is a non-abstract, non-mystical, completely rational and thus understandable scientific, biological explanation of us humans. Okay, so how are we to explain and understand the human condition, understand why we humans are the way we are, so brutally competitive, selfish and aggressive, that human life has become all but unbearable? In fact, how are we to make so much sense of our divisive behaviour that the underlying cause of it is so completely explained and understood that, as Professor Prosen said, the whole of the human race is psychologically rehabilitated and everyone's life is transformed at the beginning? I know everyone listening is living with the belief, well, it's what we were all taught at school and are told in every documentary we watch, that humans' competitive, selfish and aggressive behaviour is due to us having savage, must reproduce our genes, instincts like other animals have. We have this selfish, competitive animal side, which Karl Marx limited to such basic needs as sex, food, shelter and clothing. I mean, our conversations are saturated with this belief, with comments like we're programmed by our genes to try to dominate others and be a winner in the battle of life, and our preoccupation with sexual conquest is due to our primal instincts to sow our seeds, and men behave abominably because their bodies are flooded with must reproduce their genes promoting testosterone, and we want a big house because we are innately territorial, and fighting in war is just our deeply rooted combative animal nature expressing itself. And what I'm going to say now is very important, so I hope everyone's listening closely. Surely this idea that we have savage, competitive and aggressive must reproduce our genes instincts cannot be the real reason for our species' competitive and aggressive behaviour. Because after all, words used to describe our human behaviour, such as egocentric, arrogant, inspired, depressed, deluded, pessimistic, optimistic, artificial, hateful, cynical, mean, sadistic, immoral, brilliant, guilt-ridden, evil, psychotic, neurotic, alienated, all recognise the involvement of our species' fully conscious thinking mind. They demonstrate that there's a psychological dimension to our conscious mind-based, psychologically troubled human condition. And what's more, we humans have cooperative, selfless and loving moral instincts, the voice or expression of which we call our conscience, which is the complete opposite of competitive, selfish and aggressive instincts. I mean, as Charles Darwin said, the moral sense affords the best and highest distinction between man and the lower animals. And of course, to have acquired these cooperative, selfless and loving moral instincts, our distant ape ancestors must have lived cooperatively, selflessly and lovingly. I mean, otherwise, how else could we have acquired them?
Yeah.
Our ape ancestors can't have been brutal, competitive and aggressive savages as we've been taught. Rather, they must have Garden of Eden-like state of cooperative, selfless and loving, innocent gentleness, which, as I'd like to explain to you, Craig, in this interview, is a state that the bonobo species of apes is currently living in which anthropological findings, now evidence, we did once live in. For instance, anthropologists like Owen Lovejoy are reporting that our species-defining cooperative mutualism can now be seen to extend well beyond the deepest Pliocene, which is well beyond 5 million years. I'll come back to shortly. It's just a convenient excuse we have used while we waited for the psychosis acknowledging and solving real explanation of our present competitive and aggressive human condition. Arrogant and mean and vindictive and even sadistic behaviour has nothing to do with wanting to reproduce our genes. I mean, that was absurd. And it's actually really good news that our behaviour is due to a conscious mind-based psychologically troubled condition, because psychosis can be healed with understanding. I mean, if our competitive and aggressive behaviour was due to us having savage instincts, then we'd be stuck with that born with hardwired innate behaviour. It would mean we could only ever hope to restrain and control those supposedly brutal instincts. But since our species' divisive behaviour is due to a psychosis, that we can finally end our psychologically troubled human condition. It's the understanding of ourselves that we needed to heal the pain in our brains and become sound and sane again. As I said, the savage instincts explanation was just a convenient excuse while we searched for the psychosis addressing and solving real explanation of our divisive behaviour, which is the explanation I'd now like to present. Very obvious. If we think about it, if an animal was to become fully conscious, like we humans became, then that animal's new self-managing, understanding-based conscious mind would surely have to challenge its pre-existing instinctive orientations to the world, wouldn't it? I mean, a battle would have to break out between the emerging conscious mind that operates from a basis of understanding cause and effect, and the non-understanding instincts that have always controlled and dictated how that animal behaves. Always been controlled by its instincts, suddenly developing a conscious mind, because if we do that, we'll very quickly see how that animal would develop a psychologically troubled, competitive and aggressive condition like we suffer from.
Yeah.
Now, since he has no conscious mind, Adam Stork doesn't think about or question his behaviour. He just follows what his instincts tell him to do. But what, from the musical The Man of La Mancha, we had to be prepared to march into hell for a heavenly cause. We had to lose ourselves to find ourselves. We had to suffer becoming angry, alienated and egocentric until we found sufficient knowledge to explain ourselves. So obvious, why haven't we been taught it at school? Now, the answer is that while it has been recognised, even from ancient times, that the emergence of our conscious mind somehow caused us to fall from grace, or however you want to describe the corruption of our original innocent, cooperative and loving state, it wasn't until science revealed the difference between the gene-based and nerve-based learning systems, which is that genes can orientate but nerves need to understand, that we finally were in a position to explain the good reason for our angry, egocentric and alienated human condition. I mean, the biblical story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden that Moses wrote so long ago in about 1500 BC actually perfectly describes the psychologically upsetting battle that emerged between our instincts and conscious intellect. It says, what does it say? That and with regard to recognition of the upsetting conflict between our moral instinct and conscious intellect, the biblical story of Adam and Eve is far from the only recognition of it from ancient times. I mean, indeed, as the researcher Richard Heinberg summarised in his 1990 book, Memories and Visions of Paradise, every religion begins with the recognition that human consciousness has been separated from the divine source, that a former sense of oneness has been lost. Everywhere in religion and myth there is an acknowledgement that we have departed from an original innocence and can return to it only through the resolution of some profound inner discord. The cause of the fall is described variously as disobedience, as eating of the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, and as spiritual amnesia, which is forgetting or blocking out, or denial, alienation, which is our psychosis. So all our religions and most of our mythologies have recognised the basic conflict within us, that the emergence of consciousness caused our fall from innocence.
Yeah.
I mean, way back in about 800 BC, the Greek poet Hesiod wrote of our species' preconscious time of living cooperatively and lovingly in his epic poem Works and Days. He wrote, "When gods alike and mortals rose to birth, a golden race, the immortals formed on earth. Like gods they lived with calm untroubled mind. Free from the toils and anguish of our kind, no decrepit age misshaped their frame. Strangers to ill, their lives in feast flowed by. Dying they sank in sleep, nor seemed to die. Theirs was each good, the life-sustaining soil, yielded its copious fruits, unbribed by toil. They with abundant goods midst quiet lands, all willing shared the gathering of their hands." So they didn't have a troubled conscious mind, and they lived a sharing gentle life. Plato also gave this other description of this innocent golden age in our species' preconscious past, writing of a time when we lived a blessed and spontaneous life, when neither was there any violence or war or quarrel among them. In those days there were no forms of government or separate possession of women and children, for all men rose again from the earth having no memory of the past. So, in other words, they lived in a preconscious state. "And the earth gave them fruits in abundance, which grew on trees and shrubs unbidden, and were not planted by the hand of man. And they dwelt naked and mostly in the open air, for the temperature of their season was mild, and they had no beds, but lay on soft couches of grass, which grew plentifully out of the earth." Yeah, so the thing is, Hesiod and Plato, like Moses, were living in a time when science still had to be developed. So they weren't able to provide the redeeming instinct can orientate, but only nerves can understand good reason why we departed from innocence and seemingly became evil by relationship between cause and effect, to become conscious of or aware of or intelligent about those relationships. So that's only happened in the last 150 years. But since the fossil record of our ancestors suggests that our large association cortex thinking, fully conscious brain appeared some 2 million years ago, that means that for almost all of those 2 million years we've been conscious. We've had no ability to explain and understand why we corrupted our original innocent instinctive self or soul. Mm-hmm. And without that redeeming explanation, the only way we could cope with the astronomical guilt of having destroyed Eden has been to deny we ever lived in a cooperative and loving innocent state.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where the excuse that we have savage, competitive and aggressive instincts like other animals came to our rescue. I mean, as false as it is, it's been an absolutely brilliant excuse, because instead of our instincts being all loving and thus unbearably condemning of our present non-loving state, they are made out to be vicious and brutal, must reproduce your genes instincts like other animals. And instead of our conscious mind being the instinct-defined cause of our corruption, it was made out to be the blameless mediating hero that had to step in and control those supposed vicious instincts within us. That it was never in a historical state, as the Jungian psychologist Eric Newman said in his book, The Origin and History of Consciousness. Most contemporary thinkers have clung to the savage instincts excuse for our divisive behaviour. There have been some who, like the ancient thinkers, truthfully recognised the basic instinct versus intellect elements involved in producing the human condition. Eugene Murray, Paul MacLean, Arthur Koestler are a few who come to mind. But while all contemporary thinkers have had the benefit of science, having revealed the difference between the gene-based and nerve-based learning systems, and have therefore had the means to truthfully explain the human condition, those who did recognise the basic instinct versus intellect elements didn't take their thinking far enough to actually explain the human condition. And those who have been attached to the false savage instincts excuse, which is the great majority of scientists, obviously haven't been thinking truthfully, so they couldn't explain the human condition. Which is all why it's taken the truthful thinking of the preeminent South African philosopher Sir Lawrence van der Post and following him myself to finally present the complete, true explanation of the human condition.